Thank you for joining. While we go through the webinar, if you have any questions, you can type those in to the GoToWebinar panel, and we will address those during the Q&A. Our presenters today, myself, Dan Barford, and Brian Rose from Terillium. And just real quick to cover on the agenda here, before we jump into that, so I oversee the JDE practice here at Terillium, and I've been in the JDE space for almost 25 years. I've really watched the JD Edwards product evolve probably more in the past 5 years than it has in the previous 15. So today we plan to talk about release 22 for Enterprise One. Our main focus is going to be around some of the features and enhancements that were brought with release 22. We'll talk a little bit about the background on the naming convention, why that's important, and how to get there. And then after that, we'll cover some key enhancements and tools in this release, followed, of course, by some demonstrations. So let's cover some of the basics. What is release 22? Well, basically, it's Oracle's new naming methodology for Enterprise One 9.2. It's meant to match the calendar year that the product is released, making it easier to kind of understand what release level you're at and what that means as far as maintaining your system. While the application and tools versions still exist, those nomenclatures aren't the identity of the system anymore. And so why did Oracle do this? Well, it's really meant to provide customers with an awareness of the product features that are included in each release level. And as most of you probably know, release 22 is available now. So release 22 also supports the overall product strategy for JD Edwards, which can be categorized into 3 areas: applications, your digital platform, and system administration. In other words, Oracle's investment in the JD Edwards product remains very strong. From an application perspective, they continue to refine and simplify the user experience. There are on-the-glass tools that allow you to automate business processes, removing manual steps and creating efficiencies, and continued enhancements to the individual modules. Putting more into the product so that the functionality exists that you could leverage as you adopt these changes. The key message around a digital platform is pretty simple. Provide efficiencies through process automation. Preserve your ERP by providing low-code or no-code tools to personalize rather than customize. And then provide a framework that supports enterprise integrations. All of that allows you to best operate your business. And then finally, from a sysadmin perspective, JDE still supports a modern infrastructure. Whether you're running on an IBM i or you've moved your hardware into Oracle's cloud infrastructure, JDE is still compatible with the different operating system database combinations. Sentinel administration, meaning you're just kind of watching and guarding the system, and then some predictive patching capabilities that they've continued to put into the product. So what is it that you get with release 22? Basically, you're going to get current on Enterprise One 9.2.6.x applications, the corresponding 9.2.6 tools. You will have to be on a 64-bit architecture. You'll get the latest and greatest from Orchestrator Studio, which we're going to show some features of. You get the new Workflow Studio, which removes the need to have the separate, development client-based workflow modeler. You get all the latest UX One features, and then things like enhanced security, the ability to deploy packages with 0 downtime, and there's just a whole list of features that come with this. And those are all wrapped up into basically those top 2, which is the applications and the tools. So how do you get there? If you're not yet on 9.2, then this is going to be more of a traditional upgrade. Anyone that's been part of an upgrade before knows that there's a strategy and a methodology about working through those upgrade steps. And that's going to probably take a little bit longer than if you're already on 9.2. In fact, for existing 9.2 customers, we've been referring to those as mini upgrades. Those are projects that can be done in 3 to 5 months. You have less of an impact to customizations, and your path to get to the release 22 is going to be quicker. During either of those, we recommend, an infrastructure refresh. So whether you're on 9.2 or you're pre 9.2, you're going to want new servers to support release 22. You're going to want to check in on your integrations and your third-party application compatibility. Make sure that those can support a 64-bit architecture, that those don't also need to be updated as well. And then, of course, any active ongoing development, we recommend a code freeze. And then you want to also take into consideration the impact your customizations will have on this process. Once again, if you're on an older release, those customizations may need to be brought forward, and that takes time in order to complete the upgrade. If you're on 9.2, you've got things like the object usage tracker and the impact analysis that will determine whether or not any of those customizations are even impacted by moving to release 22. Obviously, there's the 64-bit component, so the supporting architecture is going to need to be at that level. And then a lot of our customers are taking a look at whether they remain running their own hardware or whether they move to a hosted or cloud infrastructure to support the latest release. All of that should be managed through maybe a continuous adoption strategy that allows you to get situated on release 22, but have a plan to continue updating the system as features are released. One tool that's very helpful to us and recommend everyone out there to check out the learnjde.com website. It's going to have a lot of information about release 22, including the roadmap, the announcements as they come out, and the full product catalog. And within that product catalog and these announcements, you can drill into functional features of the product. So if you're interested in what's new in manufacturing, it's going to give a summary of that, and then each of those product catalog links will take you into the specifics and even give you a way to download the associated ESUs that provide that functionality. If you haven't been out to learnjde.com, I definitely encourage that. Okay, so I'm going to wrap up my section with this. The journey to get to release 22, it should include a strategy for continuous adoption. If you don't think you can get to a continuous adoption strategy right away, then it should be part of a long-term plan. It really sets the stage to continue taking updates as they're released. And these are just some of the planned features, some of which I think are already available, but offering your users the ability to reset their password, getting notified for long-running UBEs, logic extensions, which is a new feature that allows you to add logic to a form without having to go through OMW and do it as a code change, the ability to call business functions through a logic extension. And so all of these are just a portion of both the planned and research-based features that Oracle is continuing to invest in the product. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Brian.
Okay, thank you, Dan. Okay, so just kind of a quick recap, guys, of where we're at up to this point. We've talked about release 22, a high-level overview. What is it? How do you embrace it? What is it looking forward to? I'm going to be diving more into some of those key enhancements and tools around that release, specifically in the digital transformation, user experience, and also the application level. A lot of times the orchestrator and notifications and those tools are really at the forefront of people's minds, but they are continuously improving the applications as well, whether it's the new Work Center load calendar that I saw just came out a couple of days ago, to things on the purchasing side, and we'll dive through those. So just one thing to remember is they are continuously improving the applications as well. Once we go through a high-level overview of those tools, I'll do a demonstration of some of the key ones that I feel are very valuable to JD Edwards organizations, wrap it up with some tips and tricks around UX One and Orchestrator, and then we will end with some questions. So before I jump in, just a quick introduction of myself. Brian Rose, I am the Director of Digital Transformation here at Trillium. I've been here just about 10 years now, and I've been very fortunate throughout my career to be able to leverage a lot of these new tools, new UX One tools, and it's very exciting to see the functionality and enhancements that have been coming out recently. The Orchestrator tool has really taken on a mind of its own. So I'm looking forward to showing you a little bit more about that. So diving into these key features, and we're not going to jump through each of these, and I don't want to PowerPoint you guys to death, but there are some key ones that I want to kind of call out that are driving factors when people start to think, is Release 22 something that is where I want to go? Is it going to give me some value from an organizational perspective? The first one is around kind of the file and attachment enhancements. So with this enhancement, it's really expanding the capability of Orchestrator by including files as orchestration inputs and outputs. These can be provided directly as an orchestration input by including them in some type of REST call, or from another system invoking an orchestration. And it's not just managing the inputs and outputs. I can actually now create files. So if I want to create a flat file out of JD Edwards, or a zipped flat file, or consume one in without an FTP, those are now features that you can do inside of the Release 22 tool, which is great when we think about things like integrations and updates, or copying attachments from one item to another. All of those are key features that are being loaded up with the R22 release. The next one that a lot of people talk about is the Workflow Studio. So the Workflow Studio, it's really bringing the workflow tool that is built into JD Edwards to kind of the non-developer user. So inside of the Orchestrator Studio, that workflow modular is now kind of on the glass. So instead of you having to go to a fat client and create workflows from that back-end level, you now can do that in the Orchestrator Studio. So think of that like item creations, running workflows, when I'm creating a user, whatever it might be. There's a lot of use cases around it. And the last kind of high-level one is around logic extensions. So this is a way for you to really enhance JDE in a more traditional way of how developers used to do it, right? So, there's a syntax in JDE for developers, things like event rules and custom logic, table IOs, which Orchestrator can't do quite yet. This logic extension feature has now built that in. So it not just brings those tools to the IT team's fingertips, but you also don't need things like package builds to get those loaded in. Diving into the next one around our user experience. One of the really cool ones that I'm going to show you this once we get into our demonstration is you can now launch orchestrations from a compose page. So you can embed an orchestration into a button in a compose page, which can return data back to you, or can just kick off an orchestration to maybe consume an Excel document, or to release a sales order from credit hold, or whatever it might be. Form extensions is something that has been very popular. When it came out, there has been some pretty significant improvements to it. Some examples of that are around, you can now change the number of rows that an end user sees. That's always been a big problem everywhere we go. Some people want to see 100, some people want to see 10, and you can actually set that default up at the form level. You can designate which columns are editable versus edit grids. And then the final one is really, you can make certain fields read only if you feel like that is something that is important to you. The pop-up messages kind of ties into that launching an orchestration, or really any feedback that we want to get from an end user's perspective. So if I want to be able to kick off an orchestration and on the glass tell me, hey, how much do I have on hand, on PO, and available for a specific item, you can now have messages which are prompted to the end user when they run these orchestrations. It could be done via a button click on an application. It could be done when you launch an orchestration in a composed page, but it's giving that end user a visible view of what's going on in the background. One of the simple kind of features that I know I'm happy to see is you can now bypass the UBE printer selection screen. So instead of you every time you're running the 31410 or 43500, you have to click through the printer screen, you can now remove that. I know a lot of end users will really like to see that, just because it gets rid of those that last extra click. And then the last one is now we can really export data from our enterprise-wide searches. So E1 Search has been great from a quick view, but it's struggled with some people because they can't do a search and pull the data out. Well, now you can actually export that data into Excel, which is very valuable for a lot of organizations. Like I talked about earlier, it's not just tech, it's not just Orchestrator that's being improved. There are lots and lots of improvements happening across the application layer as well. Just two quick ones is there's a new requirements planning summary console. So this is really a way for buyers, planners to quickly analyze and manage kind of the large volume of action messages you get from an MRP. It gives you some ability to look at some what-if type of analysis, do some simulations, and determine if you're going to be short on products when you're running them through. I also talked about how there is that new Work Center load calendar, which, like I said, I haven't got my hands on it yet just because it just came out. But it seems like it has some great functionality to help some drag and drop type of scheduling. And the other key one too is around the PO approval mobile application. So like most of you probably know, the standard applications at JDE were sunsetted, and they have now moved more towards kind of a visual builder type of application or mobile app, which can be used across any type of phone or tablet. So there is a out-of-the-box built PO approval mobile app you can utilize if you have that visual builder software. So something that we're seeing more and more organizations do is take that platform and build it out more towards what's tailored to them versus having to have a out-of-the-box type of tool. So we've gone through some of the high levels around digital transformation, user experience, application enhancements. Now I'm going to jump into the demonstration. Before I do that, just to pull up some of the key things that I'm planning to go through today around user experience, Orchestrator, and then finally the application side. So this is just a list, and I'll be walking through from exporting to how do we launch orchestrations from a composed page, showing that pop-up, creating an orchestration from a service request in an easy manner. So just a high level of what we're going to be diving through. So I'm going to stop the PowerPoint and dive over into JDE. Okay. Let's show this. Okay. So now you guys should be seeing JD Edwards. So I'm going to go ahead and log in. So this is that release 22 version of JDE, and it's going to look very similar to 9.2 from a logging in perspective, but there's a lot of things in the background that have really been enhanced from a process perspective. So where we're going to start is from the most simplistic one, right? So this E1 search bar is something like I talked about. It's been great for quick hitters, but it's kind of difficult to grab any data from it and pull it into some type of document. So if I were to come in and do a search on maybe something like 4242, you're going to notice now all of these have this little drop down. So I can export any of these results. If I wanted to say, hey, I want to go ahead and look at everything that has been pulled back for a specific search, I can click this drop down. It's going to say, do you want to export it in a CSV or an Excel document? And do you want to just bring the current page, which is the results that you have shown, or all of the data inside of this search? And once you click OK, it will drop a Excel document inside of my browser, and I can get to that information, right? So giving you more of a way to search and gather the data than just doing searching. So this is something that we're seeing people really loving from an enhancement perspective. Now, inside of the next step from a composed page here, as you'll notice, there is this little button here, right? So this is me embedding a orchestration into a page. For this use case, it's going to be, I want to be able to very easily look up how much inventory do I have of a specific part number? How much do I have on hand? How much do I have available? And even how much do I have on PO? And when I come in and click on this little guy here, what it's going to do is prompt me for what are you looking for? What inputs are important and from a value perspective? So I'm going to say, I want to look for anything that is item number 220 and has a branch plant equal to M30. Click run. And it brings back, this is that pop back message I was talking about, right? It can be done either from a composed page or from somewhere inside of an actual application. And this is all configurable. So the data, the calculations, the formatting, all of this can be whatever I want it to be. So you'll see it's bringing me back what item number I searched on, how much do I have available on hand, on PO. If I wanted to do a different item, so I could do a different item, put it in M30, run, and it would go and do the search on that. So it's an awesome quick tool, and this is just an example of me doing it more from an inquiry perspective, but it doesn't have to be just an inquiry. It can actually kick off some type of execution like I talked about. If I wanted to remove a specific order from credit hold, or move a supplier order from approved or from unapproved to approved, that is the type of inputs and orchestrations that you can build out inside of this tool. And the mappings and the inputs that are prompted to me from the end user's perspective are based on whatever that orchestration is trying to get me to. Now with this, if I were to kind of an instant feedback, it's giving me that success. Let's say I put in a bad item number or something like that. It's also going to say, hey, you put in an invalid item number. So it's giving you not just when there's a success, but also when there's any type of failure, it will give you that feedback as well. And you'll notice this is the same type of code you would get if you entered this inside of a application. So really cool stuff. Now, when we tie that into something like an application or the pop back information, I'm going to jump into a PO entry app. So this is open purchase orders. And let's just go ahead and do a wide open find. So you'll see in here, I've got a bunch of information and a couple of buttons up here. This orchestration being called is exactly what was on the first screen. It's just kind of used for a different interpretation. So I could go ahead and grab a specific line and say, hey, I want to do an inventory check. And it'll do that pop-up to say, hey, this is how much inventory on hand, available on PO that you have for this specific part number. Now, it doesn't have to be just for one line. I could say, I want to look at these 4 lines. I'm going to do an inventory check, and it's going to show me all 4 in a single screen. So this is really neat to me because Orchestrator has always been something that's been very powerful, but a lot of end users, once they kick them off, they really don't know what happens in the background. It doesn't give them kind of that immediate feedback of how many records did I just process, or what inventory balances do I have of this specific part. So now you're able to really bring that data back to the end user and give them that visual feedback right away. So this one's really cool to me. because it answers that question of how do I know everything processed as it should have, and giving me all that type of information. Okay, so we've talked about how we are moving through the process of pulling data out from a search perspective, some of the enhancements around calling and orchestration from a compose page, and bringing data back to the end user inside of the glass. Now I'm going to jump into some of the form request enhancements that I was talking about earlier. So some examples here, if I wanted to come up and do some grid properties, this is that value I was talking about, right? So it's currently set at 10. If I wanted to say every time I did a search, it brought back 100 values, it's as simple as that. So that is allowing me to manipulate how many grids do I want to bring back every single time I do a search. Also inside of this grid, let's say I wanted to add something like a carrier, right? So I add a carrier with something like a form extension. What that's going to do is throw that all the way here to the right. Now, kind of the bummer around this is just like with an address number, if I see an address number, I may not know who that is just by their number. I'd really love to see the associated description to that address book number. Well, I can right click on this and click associate description. And now it brings in the associated description to that value. So I can see who the carrier is from a number perspective and also what their name is. So if I were to save this, close out. It's my go-to webinar sitting right in the way, so let's move out. Okay. So if I click find, you'll see it went from 10 to now I've got 100. And if I pull up the carrier number, which I added to my screen, it also shows their associated description. So that's something that is added in this newer release of the form requests. I talked about it a little bit earlier. You know, you can create some new edits. You can determine or change a field from a grayed out field to an edit field, but these are really the kind of the key values that we're seeing people really liking when they're looking at the R22 version. Now, the last one is around the bypassing of that printer screen, right? So an example here, if I were to go to work order processing, and let's go and run a batch job. I'm going to data select, put in my order number. Okay. So when I just clicked OK, it kicked off my batch version. So instead of me having to click again on my default printer, it will automatically pass that through. And that can be set up on a user by user basis. So if I jump into P40092 and look up my user ID, this is where that value is determined. So there's this new toggle where it says report submission. If I'm allowing to always use the default, it's not going to prompt me to select through for my report or my printer. If I click no, it's going to be just like it works in the past. Okay, so easy setup, can be done at the user level. If there's certain people that print to multiple printers, it doesn't stop them. But if it's someone who never prints, it's just moving through the screen just to do it, you can get rid of that. Okay. All right. So the last thing in terms of kind of application updates, this is an example of one of the new apps that has come out with R22. So this is staff utilization, and this is applicable to anyone that's leveraging CMMS or CAM. to where you can assign resources, whether they're people or machines, and actually schedule out their specific times. And it will give you drag and drop type of capability as well. So if I ever wanted to go and look at and reschedule assignments, it's going to give me some ability to move things around, drag and drop, pick a different day, whatever it might be. Now, this is also kind of the basis from what I'm seeing of the new Work Center load calendar. So I think it's going to be very similar from an end user's perspective. But this is one of those key features and key application enhancements that just shows the continuous investment from not just a technology perspective, but also inside of the apps. All right, so we've walked through a lot of the new features from a inside of JDE perspective. Now I'm going to jump over to the Orchestrator Studio. So I'll just leave this open. Okay, so we're going to dive into Orchestrator Studio. And for those of you that haven't seen R22, you're going to see a couple of new icons in here, specifically workflows, logic extensions, attachments is one that has some enhancements. It did come out before 22, but there are enhancements to it that are only seen in R22. Now, for today's example, we're going to be talking about a couple of different things. The first one is going to be around the ease, the way you can now easily create orchestrations from form requests. So a lot of times people will use a process recording, create a form request, and then they get in the Orchestrator Studio and they have to go through the process of, okay, now I have to associate it to an orchestration and create my outputs and do all those types of things. There's a new button in here which allows you to automatically create orchestrations. So I'm going to go into a form request that I created. This is me updating a PO. Now, before I go and create that orchestration, the one thing I want to show too, which has really fixed one of the bigger needs or the bigger asks that I've seen from organizations, is this new filter button. Okay, so example, if I want to make sure that I am updating the correct line. In the past, it was somewhat tricky depending on your use case to make sure, am I updating the line I want to be updating? Am I updating the right PO line, whatever it might be? What has come out is this new filter button. So I can actually come in and filter on forms that don't have headers. So PO inquiry, the edit form, you cannot search on the header, right? It shows all the records. This is a way where you could say, I want to filter down to a specific line number and pass that in, and then I know every single time I'm making this update, it is updated the correct line number. So think of this like a QBE for applications that don't have a QBE. That's exactly what this is doing, and gives so much flexibility for things like order updates, item updates, whatever it might be. So this was one of the things that I know when I first started with Orchestrator, we found ways to work around it back in the 14, 15 days. Now with this, it's awesome that you can really determine and define which values you want to update inside of the Orchestrator. Now, once I've determined and created my form request, there's this little button right here under Manage, which is Create Orchestrations. So when I click that, what it does is automatically create my orchestration, brings in whatever request I'm doing, whether it's a service request, data request, rule, whatever it might be, brings that in, and it also updates my mapping and creates my input values. So all the stuff that we've had to do in the past now can be done inside of the tool. So it's more of just a way to make it easier with people leveraging the process recorder to create these. This was the next step to really make the orchestration process very, very easy. Okay, so let's jump back. We don't need to save. So I'm going to show a couple of examples around how attachments have been enhanced in release 22. Now it can be attachments, it can be external documents, it can be generating files, and I'll show you kind of how each of those works throughout this process. So a lot of times people, whether it's via an integration, or I want to be able to update or append or delete an attachment and have it be done in an automated fashion, you couldn't really do that with Orchestrator. Now I can actually add attachments, and I'll jump into this to just kind of give you some background. This shows you what I can do. So I can get the text from the attachment, I can add attachments, I can update text, upload file, download file, delete. All of these are related to media objects, right? Specifically text in this situation. So if I wanted to have an orchestration which grabs data from a third-party system, passes that in, and generates an attachment, that was somewhat tricky in the past, or vice versa. If I wanted to pull a text attachment, grab the information, and pass it to a third-party system, that also was very challenging. Now with this new attachment tool, I can do that with Orchestrator out of the box. So this is an example here of me doing an add. The attachment name or the item name is what the attachment is going to be called. You can pass in whatever value that you want. And this new org text is the text that is going to be created in the attachment. So to give you a quick example, I'm going to show how you could run one of these. Oh. All right, so let's get our doc number 154706. Order type is SO 00200. And we can call this, right, whatever we want the new Orchestrator attachment to be. When I run that, go ahead and jump back here. And you'll see it created my attachment. And there it is, right? There's my attachment name. Hello, everyone. So that's just an example of how we can generate or create an attachment. Now I could append this, I could make changes to this, I could grab the data, but just add some flexibility around how attachments and media objects can be managed. I know with some organizations, they want to be able to copy one attachment to another item, right? That's something that you can do with Orchestrator now, or copy a lot of attachments, really depending on what your use case is for that. Now, the second one is downloading attachments. So if I wanted to go and look at maybe all the attachments that were associated to a specific sales order number, and I wanted to download all of the pictures or attachments. This is a orchestration where if I were to jump in here, you'll see it's me, I'm downloading a file, right? So instead of me adding, I'm downloading a file. And if I were to show this example, you'll see I can come in and same type of process. I go to run this. 154704 SO 0200. Oh, actually, I got to change this real quick. 154704 SO. You'll notice down here at the bottom, it dropped an attachment. And if I were to just quickly jump over to show, it downloaded all the attachments that I had associated to that specific record, right? So this is me pulling attachments out of the system and being able to use them in all different types of areas. Jump back to Orchestrator Studio. Now, the last one is how do I, or the opportunity to generate files, whether it's me actually consuming an Excel file without an FTP or generating a flat file Excel document that can be used in all different types of integration. So this here is an example of me generating a file. So I'm doing a data request for all of the sales orders for today. And in your outputs, you'll see this files tab where I can determine, is this a single file? Is this multiple files I want to create in a zip? And what is the file name that I'm going to be creating? So when I run this, same thing. You'll notice down here at the bottom, it generated a Excel document. I'll show you once again. So it went and pulled, and these are all the values that I have inside of my data request to pull back into this document. So very, very easy way to create files, whether it's inbound or outbound from JD Edwards. All right, so we've talked through just from a high level, right, all of the different high level R22 benefits from a digital transformation, user experience, application. Let me jump on back to our slides. So just some high level tips and tricks, based on the being around UDOs and UX One and Orchestrator for a long time. You need to start with defining a strategy and standardizing that strategy, making sure that you have good naming conventions and promotion paths and your security, right? Who's able to do what? Maybe end users can create watch lists, but do you want them creating orchestrations? Same thing with personal forms. So creating that strategy of how you want to leverage these tools. Try to break orchestrations into chunks, meaning now that you can call multiple orchestrations, don't try to do it all in one. It just complicates things, makes it harder to test. Break those out from a chunk perspective. Crawl, walk, run is another key piece. Everyone sees these new great tools, and maybe they're not doing anything with UX One today. I would really recommend, start with a specific area or a specific group or a specific type of UX One before trying to implement this across the board, because it can at times be very challenging. And then the last one is really change the development mindset. So in the past, pre even R22, when there's been an issue, a lot of JD Edwards customers will go towards a modification path and saying, okay, let's take a step back. Can we use Orchestrator now? Can we use logic extensions, workflow tool, whatever it might be? So really changing that mindset of, instead of us going pure development every time, do we have the ability to leverage orchestrations or some type of tool in JDE to make it more efficient? Okay, so just from a wrap-up perspective, we run a lot of workshops around how Release 22 can help organizations. So if you are interested in having us come, and whether it's a Zoom or a Teams meeting or on-site, please feel free to reach out to us at weknowjd@trillium.com, and we can get that workshop set up for you. And then please join us and come see us at our booth at Blueprint this year. I know we're all excited to see people and be out with the customer base. So Dan and I will certainly be out there. So feel free to stop by the booth and say hi. Okay, well, I think we're good. So once again, thank you, everyone. I really appreciate your time today, and have a good rest of your week.